There we go. I
We
can't
good?
see you. There we go.
Yeah, we're on now. We good? Good evening and welcome to the workshop for Beaumont City Council. Today is Thursday, July 22nd. And this workshop I will call to order at 4:01 p.m. Nicole, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Santos? Here. Councilmember Fenn?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem White?
Here.
Mayor Lara?
Here. Do we have, let's see. Councilmember Santos, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. I'll be happy to do that. Stand, put our hand on the left hand, heart, and begin. I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to America and to the republic, one nation. Justice for all.
Okay, this brings us to public comment period. This meeting will be open to the public and conducted in a virtual format to be inclusive of all participation preferences. Public comment participation is encouraged by emailing any comments to the city clerk's office or by calling in using the phone number provided on the front page of the agenda. Nicole, do we have anyone calling in or sending in email?
I will check written comments. I have no written comments, but I believe we have someone on the line. Christina, can you verify?
Yes, we have one caller, Mr. Ron Roy, and I can transfer him up when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Roy, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay, go ahead. You're on the line.
Okay, I'm good to go. Thank you. Yes, Council. I'm addressing tonight's workshop, and I wanted to bring up accountability and fair distribution of the cost burden. Right now, we're looking at almost $100 million to upgrade our sewer system. And as for the aging sewers, most of Beaumont's sewer infrastructure has been installed since 2004 in our specific plan communities, such as Oak Valley Specific Plan, Seneca Springs, Four Seasons, Stetson, Solera, Three Rings, Sundance, etc., and paid for by the Melrose bonds with a current bond debt of around $400 million. Assuming a minimum useful life of 50 years, the earliest these communities should be looking at replacing pipe should be 2054. That's over 34 years from now. Given 30-year retirement of bonds, the earliest Melrose communities will see their bonds retired starting in 2034. Therefore, saving for future sewer replacement via the future facilities fee components embedded in the 30 or more community facilities districts should not start until at least 2034 for the Melrose communities. Also, Fairway Canyon paid for sewer upgrades, which we did not receive. These should be recognized and compensated for. I'm also concerned from an accountability and fair distribution standpoint that the older neighborhoods in Beaumont that do not have any Melrose sewer bonds will be most in need of sewer replacement, but will be asking the rest of the city to pay for their sewer upgrades. Estimates for sewer replacement need to be established for the non-Melrose neighborhoods to determine their prorated share of the sewer system replacement costs, including converting from septic to citywide sewer systems. They should be required to establish sewer assessment district in their areas, not citywide, to pay for their fair share to upgrade their disproportionately older sewer systems. As far as capturing runoff, the city needs to provide the public with a study and proposed policy for runoff capturing infrastructure I've heard capturing wet weather runoff is difficult, but that's where the city can capture most of the water. So hopefully to replenish our groundwater aquifers in compliance with recent state legislation. And so I hope we can do something and maybe connect that with the existing sewer system. I know it's difficult. Finally, as far as home runoff systems, the city should look at how individual homes like ours can capture runoff during the wet season and be able to replenish our groundwater aquifers. So I really appreciate it. It's a big money, $100 million. So, and the Belarus community is already $400 million in the hole. So thank you for that, and please consider the cost here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Roy.
Thank you.
Ms. Day, the comment from Mr. Roy regarding the payment of future replacement, my understanding is that that's what our rate study does, and that's what the rate study is for. The Belarus or the CFDs are covering the infrastructure that is currently in the ground and was installed. There's no payment for future repairs, correct?
That's correct. We will show you some replacement where we're having, we see a legislative issue coming down the pipeline that requires us to do some replacements within our system. You'll see that in the 10-year CIP and something that the utility will be responsible for doing. But yes, that would be covered also with your rate study that we will go into at the end of next year. And then ultimately that will then be extrapolated out to your existing rate payers. So
Okay.
Nothing to do with the CFD.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks. I appreciate the
Mayor?
clarification.
Mayor, may I ask a question, please?
Mayor Pro Tem White?
Yeah, actually, it's a comment. Mike, I can barely hear you. I don't know if everyone else is experiencing that, but is there any way to up the volume on your side so we can hear you better?
All right, we'll work on that. Thank you.
All right.
Whoa. Is that? How's that, Mr.
That's
Mayor
much
Pro
better.
Tem White? Better?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right. Thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. Mr. Martinez, did you have a question or?
No, I'm just adjusting my light. Thank you.
You look fantastic.
I'm
Okay.
orange right now. I can't get rid of it.
All right. With that, we will get into the action item for a presentation of the draft wastewater master plan.
Very good. Well, Mayor, I will introduce this and then turn this over to Tony Akel with Akel and Associates. They are who you hired to do the wastewater master plan for the city. We started this project or developed this project as part of the 2018 CIP, awarded it in 2019, and then have been working on it subsequently since then. The overall scope of this was to give you an overall assessment of your collection system. This does not include your treatment plant because the treatment plant is being currently built and in service and is essentially brand new. And so we felt like that was not a needed part of this scope. So basically this will look at your collection systems, including your pipes, your lift stations. It did a condition assessment of those, and then further went into, we did some rain monitoring so that we could see if we had potential inflow and infiltration issues. And that you'll see that as part of this presentation, which then ultimately allowed us to create the first water model for your system. And so that is a tool that you're able to use through the development process. When a developer comes in, they will pay a deposit to run the model to make sure that we don't have any neck downs in your pipes, or we don't send any pipes over capacity based on their development. And so it just further ensures that we're not having or creating problems within the system. And then from there, we developed CIPs that are basically going to be developer driven. And so what we've heard from council is development, drives development. And so there's a CIP that will identify as vacant parcels build out, then these would be the set of improvements that any of those developers would have to do. Any of the potential problem areas that we see within the system, and there were very few outside of the lift stations that would need capacity upgrades, then came into the city side of the CIP, which we've shown you a little bit of a first blush at that CIP when we adopted the 5-year CIP. So nothing that should be tremendously alarming to the city council. Probably the biggest thing that's coming up are, again, things that we see coming down legislatively that are driven towards the collection system. And so we're very excited to be able to present to you tonight the findings of the master plan. We're not asking for adoption tonight. We just want to present you the information, make sure that you don't have any huge concerns. We will actually draft the plan, Tony and his folks, and then we will bring that back for formal adoption. And this will be what governs the wastewater system as we move forward through the next 5-10 years. We would recommend that after formal adoption that you do take a look at this every 5 years or so. And at some point we will reincorporate into the master plan the wastewater treatment plant to make sure that as these EDUs come online, we're able to handle them at the plant accordingly. And that as we get closer to that threshold for needing to go into design of an upgrade to the plant for the next set of MGDs, so we go from 6 to 8, that we are able to stay on top of that accordingly, so we don't end up in any problems like we've had in the past. So with that, I will turn it over to Tony Akel. Jeff, Daxton and I are all on the line if you have questions for us or Tony as we go through. Again, we're super excited. This is one of the neatest things that I think a city can do. So I set you up, Tony. Don't bore him.
All right, Christine. Thank you very much for the introductions. This is awesome. Mr. Mayor, council members, it's a pleasure to give you a presentation on the Wastewater Master Plan 2021.
Thank you, sir.
What is it and how do we use it? What is a wastewater master plan and how do we use it? So we'll talk a little bit about what is it and how do we use it and why did we prepare it in the first place? I think Christine alluded to why. So we'll go through some of the slides here. So this is what is it and how do we use it? So the master plan looks at the capacity adequacy of the system. So the focus is going to be, you're going to hear over again, capacity as opposed to condition. Because pipelines have two elements. You look at the capacity, can they handle the flow? Or you look at the second part, condition, how old are they? Can they last? How long will they last? Here we look at capacity and make sure there are no bottlenecks in the system. So it looks at the level of service, what is expected by customers, existing customers, but also we want to address future growth. One of the more important aspects of a master plan is that it provides defensibility for planning purposes. It provides defensibility, most importantly, for budgetary purposes, for budgetary planning. So these are the what is it and how do we use it? It does document the improvements that will be needed, line item by line item, how much they cost, and of course, who will eventually be paying for them. We're stepping back a little bit here to talk about wastewater flow. Where does it come from? It comes from our homes. We flush it down the toilet. We think somebody's taking care of it. Well, Paxton is taking care of it, but we'll see how it gets there. So it leaves our homes through what's just called a lateral, a pipeline. It's shown here is a white pipeline, 4-inch diameter. It goes down to the street, and in the street we have bigger pipelines that takes it down and conveys it all the way to the treatment plant. So this is the snapshot that most residents think about. They know they're flushing the water, they're reusing the water, and it goes someplace. Out of sight, out of mind, someone is taking care of it. Then let's take a look, once it gets in the street, what happens? The next slide is going to say, in the street, we're collecting all that water and it's going to pipelines. It's collecting, and those pipelines this is the ideal condition, we like them to flow downwards. Downwards meaning by gravity. That's the best case scenario. So we build pipelines that slope downwards, and if we can do that all the way, we're not using any energy, we're saving. And that's why you're going to keep hearing the word gravity sewer. Gravity sewer means it's in the street, in a pipeline, and it's going downwards and taking that flow, collecting it to the plant. But that's an ideal world. But with challenging topography, we can't have downwards all the time towards the plant. When we have to go upgrade, we're gonna have to use a device that's called a pump station. So we collect that water at the pump station, it's shown here, and with energy, we force that pressure. With pressure, we force that water uphill. And that's why you hear the word force. We're forcing that water into a main. That's the main that is up, you see here on this side, and that's where you hear force main. So we talked about three components. There's a gravity that collects it downwards. There's a pump station. We have lots of them in Beaumont that collects it. A pump station better be able to pump all that water that comes in no matter what time of day, pumps it into a pipeline and force it into that pipeline. It's a main, force main, gravity sewer, force main, pump station. You're going to hear that throughout. Okay, so now that we have the elements of this going to the treatment plant, let's take a look at our specific system. So the map to your right shows the city of Beaumont, and the lines, the green lines, I think they're color-coded as well. There are blue lines as well. Blue lines are the larger 10-inch pipelines that are collecting water, collecting the wastewater all the way to the treatment plant. And there are red arrows that are intended to show you how the wastewater is collected from neighborhood towards a central point to a lift station. Remember, we talked about the lift or the pump station, and it's going through force mains uphill or uphill topography, up and downhill sometimes, to a point where it can go downhill back. But ultimately, we want to send all that water to the treatment plant. And as an example, let's take a look all the way in the northwest, Fairway Canyon. This blue area here goes downhill to what's called a fairway canyon. So it was downhill, but unfortunately, that's all we can do here. We have to pump it. We have to, with a pump station, through a force main. So you can see that arrow telling us, now we're going this way through a force main, long ways. Actually, it goes all the way to the lower Oak Valley. And then Lower Oak Valley is collecting in its own area. The purple area is collecting that, plus the blue area, and it's sending it towards the next pump station, which in turn is collecting this green area here, and then, which is called the Upper Valley. And all that flow, Upper Valley, Lower Oak Valley area, the Fairway Canyon, is collected and is being sent through another force main to the most important pump station that you're going to hear about even today, the Beaumont Mesa pump station. This pump station essentially collects pretty much most of the flow west of Highway 10. So in addition to all the flows we talked about, we also collect the flow from this Olivewood area. It collects it and then sends it through a long force main all the way to the plant. So the Beaumont Mesa pump station is critical. So that's on the west side. On the east side, works the same. We collect it through the smaller pipeline, which are the green lines, going all the way to the blue lines. The blue lines are the bigger lines, and you see some pipe sizes, and that's the size of the pipeline, the gravity pipeline, all the way to the pump station. In this case, it's Noble Creek. Noble Creek sends that water to the next pump station, Marshall Creek. And Marshall Creek collects another area, sends it all the way to the plant. The wastewater plant is located right here. And likewise, on the east side, this area here, northeast and east, is collected through those arrows. They point how the flow is directed all the way to the plant. The southeast has to be pumped as well because the grade is not advantageous for just gravity. It's pumped into a gravity main here. And this area, the yellow area, it's called the Seneca Springs, is also pumped. And that continues to the plant. So this is the mechanics. I went through the mechanics of how it works. And if you like it, we can go back and revisit this, but no, I'm kidding. Any questions? This is intended to be a workshop. So if you have any question at any time, please stop and ask. Otherwise, I can talk for the next 3 hours. All right.
He's kidding, but he could.
All right, very good. So we've talked about the system, some statistics about our system. Interesting facts. 177 miles up, remember gravity sewers, the one that go down. 177 miles of them. And we have 20 miles of those pipes that are pumped up the hill or pumped up and down the hill. And we have 10 of those lift stations. They're shown in the blue symbol. Those are our lift stations. And we have one wastewater treatment plant. These are some interesting facts about our system. This is a process diagram that talks about how we started collecting information for this master plan. Because remember, our main goal is to make sure it becomes a defensible document moving forward. It's a big investment in this tool that it's not just a document, but it's also a computer program. It's called hydraulic model that we developed and put together and validated, made sure it's accurate for the analysis and defensible for the analysis, and supporting the document that will be presented to you shortly afterwards, and develop the costs. The agenda for today, I think I divided this into chapters. There are going to be 8 chapters of the master plan. I'll go briefly over each of the chapters. So when you receive the document, you'll remember every word I said today, and you won't have to read the report. Starting with chapter 1, it's an introduction, the planning area, and we'll talk. I'll go through those chapters next. And each chapter has a purpose. Excuse me. The purpose of chapter 1 is to introduce the master plan objectives. And we've mentioned them briefly, but there are more specific objectives. It documents them, again, to make it a defensible document. And the elements of that chapter, some maps, the objectives are all listed, some definitions for those that know or don't know, abbreviations, and how is the report organized. We've clipped, so we have a big package that was submitted to staff for review. And I want to mention before I go too far, this has been a team effort with Christine and Jeff and your staff. Back and forth. This was a collaborative effort back and forth. It only becomes defensible when there's engagement. And I can tell you, I have not seen as much engagement as I'm seeing here. And Christine and Jeff, bless their hearts. I mean, they were the guiding, they were guiding this process, but also contributing to, elevating the level of defensiveness in here. I'm impressed with the knowledge base of your staff. So in this introduction, just provides so we submitted a package that has a lot of it has a lot of maps, a lot of tables, and by the time after this is reviewed and approved, we'll submit a report that has a text that wraps around it. So I took some of those tables and some of those texts just to explain what those chapters are about, and so we can discuss them in this workshop. And this shows just a regional map for Beaumont and the objectives. And so the objectives, how much sewer flow from existing customers. So we really looked at and studied the existing customers. We studied how the water is we characterized the water from those basins. We studied the existing system. We studied how the pump stations are reacting, and that's how we were able to develop a computer model. The model becomes an accurate tool, it says here, for evaluating the capacity adequacy of pipelines and lift stations. And do we meet an adequate level of service for our customers? And if not, what do we need to do? And we'll talk about, did we meet that level of service? And what improvements do we need to do? And that's what this report addresses. What improvements? How much do they cost? Next, chapter 2 characterizes the planning area. Number 1, what is the service area that we're looking for? We're servicing. What land uses are we expecting to develop? One of the primary objectives of a wastewater master plan or infrastructure master plan is to support a general plan. The general plan, smart planning people are developing areas and opportunity areas for development. So when developer comes in, we can tell them, what is available, but the infrastructure has to support it. When they are ready, are we ready? Is the system ready to accept them? And that's what this project had to look at. Can we accept them? When can we accept? Or if we can't accept their flow at this time, what needs to be constructed so they can develop in a properly in their timeline? And we also looked at some population, and population we look at in generics. The most important part is linking the land to the water, the wastewater to the land. And that's important in California, always linking the water to the land. Land uses, those are generic maps. The one on the top right shows the service area boundary in green. The exhibit on the left shows the existing land uses, how they're used. And the one at the bottom is the 2040 general plan land use map. Okay. The next exhibit picks up and does an Excel almost inventory. So this is where we start digging into numbers. I will not cover numbers unless if you want me, please stop me anytime. I can talk about all these numbers. If we have all the time, we have all night till 11, I think. I'm only kidding. But these are inventorying because again, we're making this defensible. It's inventorying the existing lands. It's inventorying all those lands that are slated for development. How many acres of residential, how many acres of commercial, or public facility or non-generating flows. So this is the inventory that we used for quantifying and estimating the flows from the future developed lands. Furthermore, we were not working just in generalities and just future lands. There's more than future land. There are specific lands slated for development that are on the books. So we used those. This is the best case scenario. We used those to inventory them, inventory what we're expecting in terms of flows from each of those developments. And those are the exact flows that we used. We documented those flows and we used those flows in the master plan when we determined what is needed, what kind of improvements do we need to, what kind of pipelines or pump stations do we need to upgrade to accommodate all these improvements. That's quite a bit of improvements that are slated here. And so we identified, the improvements needed at ultimately, but also, short or intermediate term, the 10-year plan is the plan that counts the most. This is where we know things might happen, that we expect things to happen, because things in the future change. We don't know what timeline is that going to be. But 10 years is the standard plan that you look for and you plan for and you budget for. We looked at population, based on the general plan. We have a population we're expecting of 67,000 people by 2038. So we looked at that, we planned for that, although we are also looking for the 10-year plan. So we look at two horizons, essentially. And then chapter 3 focuses on, again, here we're evaluating an existing system. We have a lot of pipelines and we're judging if that pipeline is good enough. So how do we judge if the pipeline is good enough? One way to judge it is go through what's called a criteria. Those are the elements that tell us how to judge a pipeline. Is it good or not good enough? What makes it good? Okay, it needs to be this much. So this chapter identifies what the judging criteria is here. This is what makes it also even more defensible. There's a lot of elements that makes it defensible. This is one of them. What criteria? Are you very conservative in your judging or are you liberal in your judging? Well, in our case, we were consistent with Eastern Municipal Water District, our neighbors to the south and west. And they are a big district. They've been using this criteria. You have adopted their criteria. And so this master plan follows the Eastern Municipal Water District judging criteria. The next slide. Again, this is listing the criteria on the right-hand side. In case you are curious, what kind of criteria? For if it's an 8-inch line, we want to make sure it's sloping downwards. Remember, it's going downwards. It's sloping downward at a certain angle. We want to make sure it goes at certain angles to make sure it doesn't get plugged. We don't want that flat. We want to be steep enough so it self-cleans itself. And the 10 inches, we allow the 10 inch to be a little bit flatter, 12 inches flatter, but if it's a smaller pipeline, we want it to be a little bit steeper so it cleans itself and doesn't cause maintenance problems. This is an example. I'm not going to go over all of these. I'm just giving an example of a criteria for judging the adequacy of a pipeline. And again, it's consistent with Eastern Municipal Water District. Flow factors, again, this is one of the tables you will see when you get the document. I will not go into it, but I can tell you what these are. If you have a 1 acre of land, how do you estimate flows from that 1 acre? This is the table that is used to estimate flows. If you have an acre, what is that acre? Is it a residential acre or is it a multifamily acre? The second to last column tells us how to calculate flows from that 1 acre. It's a gallon per day per acre. If it's a single family residential, 1 acre, we multiply by 1,200 gallons per day per acre. We have 1,200 gallons per day from that 1 acre single family residential. And again, these are consistent with the Eastern Municipal Water District. So these are the factors for estimating. Again, I will not go into it, but you will see this when you get the big, it's going to be a very thick document when you get it. You're going to flip through this on a PDF format, and you will see this table. That's what it's used for. Another important concept is the diurnal factor. When the water goes or wastewater goes into a pipeline, it's not a constant flow. It goes sporadically from a house, from a business sporadically, and then it merges, and then the flows are not steady all day. You have peak flows. At certain times of day, people take a lot of showers in the morning or evening. So you expect a lot of flows to come in during that time from residential areas. During the day, not as much. So there's this wave that you see in the system, and we have to characterize it to make sure we are simulating it in this computer model. Because the computer model measures the heartbeat of the system. It's not a snapshot in time. It measures the system over a day, over a period of a year, and looks at seasonal flows. It looks at wet weather flows as well that might seep into the system. Chapter 4 looks at the existing collection facilities, archives the existing facilities, or inventories the existing facilities. So it will list the inventories of the pipelines and the lift stations. We've covered this in the introductory section of this presentation, so I won't talk about this. It talks about the general, how many miles of pipelines we have, gravity, force main, pump stations. And this is the table version of that, of the pipelines we talked about. 177, we said gravity mains, this is shown here. And then force mains, about 20 miles of force main. So in total, we have about 196 miles of pipelines. And this shows percent-wise for each of the sizes, percent-wise. What does it constitute? This is showing us the majority of the pipeline, look at this, 73%, are 8-inch pipelines, the ones that go into neighborhoods. But then after the neighborhoods, we collect them with larger pipelines and take them all the way to the treatment plant. This is another process diagram that shows, remember on the right-hand side, we showed you where those pumps are, those pump stations. This diagram on the left shows how the pump stations are connecting to each other. Are they bypassing it, or are we tributary to that lift station? So in this case, Oak Valley, which is here, is not being bypassed. The flow from Fairway Canyon on the north is tributary to that lift station. So that lift station connects the Oak Valley purple area, but it also collects the blue area from Fairway. So this is a process diagram that helps us follow how does the flow get to the treatment plant. And that also will be, we have already assigned figure numbers. So you'll see those, but you'll see text wrapped around those figures and tables. Another big tables, this is listing the inventory of all the pump stations. All those are telling us how many pumps, what are the capacities. And then their levels, and there's a lot of other information. We need all this information because we evaluated the capacity adequacy of those lift stations. Chapter 5 looks at the flows. So there's a physical element that we talked about, but the flows that get in is another element, and we can't leave that unknown. We have to characterize that, and we did. There was a very ambitious wastewater flow monitoring program that you invested in to measure flows from all those lift stations and characterize the flows. How is the flow being collected? What is the influence of inflow and infiltration from rainfall, during rainfall? And we lucked out. We didn't have a big, expensive flow monitoring program. We chased rain event, and of all times, during the beginning phases of the pandemic, when everyone was panicking and wasn't willing to go anywhere, our subconsultant VNA was willing to travel and go through approval processes to go in and install the meters, monitor, and remove the meters. And luckily, again, with a very short time frame for monitoring, we were able to capture a healthy rainfall event. This is a good, like a jackpot that we got. And then we started characterizing the flows. How do we see flows throughout the year? January, February, and this is telling you how the flows makes it to the plant. We have low flows in January. We have high flows in November. So this graph shows the red represent flows. But if you look on the top part of the graph, you see that little bar here in light green, that represents rainfall. So when you see rainfall, the highest rainfall is November. The system responds. So rainfall is contributing to the system. That's what this is telling us. December, we received a little bit, and the flow was a little bit less. And then in August, in summertime, we get also more. It's another peak that we get. So November high flows are due to wet weather flows. That's established. This is scientific from the measured flows. Some historical numbers in case interested. So we have 3.6 million gallons per day. That's MGD. This is an average flow. 1.3 times higher than average during maximum day dry weather. And we have 1.8 times higher than average during maximum day. Some important statistics. Why are these important? Because we don't judge the capacity adequacy of a pipeline during an average day. We want to make sure that pipeline can accommodate flows at any time, even during the peak, even during rainfall events. And for each of those conditions, there's a separate judging criteria that kicks in. Build-out wastewater are based on the land use types. So this is an inventory against a table you will see in the master plan. I won't go into that because it takes a while, and I'm not sure, and you haven't had dinner yet. So suffice to say that these are the expected flows at the build-out. Total average dry weather flow is going to be about 17 MGD. And we are currently at 3.6 MGD. So when at build-out, that flow is going to accommodate a lot of other lands, a lot of other developments that will require all those improvements that you see in the master plan. You have already seen, I bet you looked at the capacity, at the capital cost, the capital improvement plan. So why is it so much? Because we are developing so much. Quite a bit of flows are expected to come in. And so of course we're going to be expanding our system. Of course it's going to be costing us a lot to expand it. Chapter 6 looks at the hydraulic model. That's the heartbeat of the system. This was the tool that was used to simulate how the system currently works. So we characterized it, and then we made sure the model in the computer is simulating how the field monitors were collecting all that data. So we had an actual reality check at each one of those pump stations. The model was reacting and behaving and reacting to those rainfall events. We made sure that was the case to make sure the model becomes defensible. Then after this benchmark model, it's a big investment that you made, but as Christine said, you didn't have one before. Now you do have a model that is defensible, that can be used for a lot of what-if scenarios, but including it was used for here, which is, at ultimate, what do we need? In 10 years, what do we need? But also through this process, we looked at, there were some urgent requests to look at some developer needs, some urgent requests to look at what constraints we have during this process. So it already has been used effectively to address several requests. So this is showing again, it's the inventory of the existing model system. The distinction is the model only focused on the large pipelines. We didn't go into all the 8 inches and the 6 inches that are in the system. We focused on the large. How do we convey the wastewater and make sure it travels to the wastewater, to the plant, without encountering restrictions and constraints? So this is the tool that will be addressing development expansions. And I think I talked about the flow monitor program. This is a map that shows where the flow monitors were placed to capture the response to the wet weather flows, but also to capture how the dry weathers are being collected. Each of the basins had different characteristics, different customer types, different customer behaviors, different infiltration response from the wet weather. So the model was calibrated. That's a word we use, calibration, but also validation is another word, and benchmarked to make sure it provides the response that is very specific to these basins, to these sites. And then we have a lot of graphs that shows model compared to, so that as an example, we look at weekdays, we look at weekends, we look at dry weather, we look at wet weather. The top graph shows the dry weather calibration. So the blue line versus red line, when it's showing the model flows, and the one is showing the field conditions. It shows a close match, and then the lower graph shows response during an actual wet weather event. And again, the green bars that you see from the top in the lower graph are the rainfalls that we encountered. And again, on March 12 and 13, 2020, we were lucky to capture, in March of all days, we captured some, we got lucky, we captured very healthy, good. It was good for this process events. So now we have this tool. What are we going to do with it? Well, this is the fun part. This is where the fun begins. It was all hard work up to this point. A lot of data collection, a lot of us bothering your staff. Really, we felt we were bothering them day in, day out. Thaxton, can we get this? Kevin, can you provide this? Jeff, Christine, please help us. We need to get this information almost, on a day in, day out. Getting all that information to make it defensible. Now is the time to use it and enjoy the benefits of this investment. So this is what we used here, starting from this chapter, is where we looked at the capacity. We judged the capacity with all those criteria we talked about. And then we were able to identify, what do we need to fix? Where do we start? What do we fix? And how big is the list to fix? So existing system evaluation. So we evaluated the peak dry. We're supposed to do that, peak dry condition and peak wet weather conditions. And we considered it for peak wet weather conditions, the design storm is called a 10-year, 24-hour design storm. That's its industry standard. And at the end of the day, the computer analysis is telling us the existing system from a capacity perspective, pipeline perspective, it's in a good shape. Not too many pipelines that, if there are improvements, we would have shown them in red. We would have flagged things in red. So this is telling us the existing system has been planned well for the existing users. And that's the good news. The next thing we looked at is identified some bottlenecks. One of the more critical improvements that we found needs immediate almost attention. It's a regional station we talked about. Remember I said the Beaumont Mesa lift station? It carries flows from all the areas west of Highway 10. Well, this is the lift station that is under capacity. Furthermore, there's a force main that was planned at one point. There's a dual force main that were planned downstream from that lift station. They're shown here one is shown as blue, one is shown as in red. They were both designed at one point in time. Only one was constructed. So the second one needs to be constructed. And it's shown in red, and it's shown it's a 16-inch force main. Also, the capacity of the lift station, it is undersized. It needs work. And because growth and developers are they would prefer to have, they prefer to develop now, it raises the urgency of addressing this undersized lift station. Also, we identify what needs to be addressed: replacing existing pumps, completing parallel force main, and expanding the wet well, because it lacks sufficient emergency capacity at this time. But also, we have an inventory of all the other lift stations. In general, most of the lift stations are undersized. So we had good news on the gravity mains. We didn't have good news on the pump stations. The pump stations or lift stations, they need attention. This is capacity only. There's more to that. There's more than capacity, and that will be addressed as well. On the condition side, a lot of the lift stations need to be addressed from a condition perspective. They're old. It's not anyone's fault. Infrastructure ages. Infrastructure becomes old. Infrastructure needs to be maintained and then eventually upgraded. So future capacity improvements, again, this is to address all the growth from the general plan. Remember, we talked about all that flow that we're expecting. Well, of course, it's going to require a lot of improvements. So this is showing all the improvements that we identified. Again, red on this map represent existing pipe deficiencies. And remember the good news, not many red lines, relatively, not many red lines. I mean, we evaluate, I can tell you, that's all we do. I've been doing this for 30 years. And I've evaluated a lot of systems. And one of the things that you worry about the most is existing system upgrades, if we have to fix it from a capacity perspective. And it'd be because it has to be conveyed to existing users. And that's something we don't want to do, but if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. These are good news. This is a good thing. So again, this was kudos to the planning team on your staff. Now, looking at developments, future developments, the purple lines that you see, those big and long pipelines that you see through the system, those are representing existing pipelines needing to be upgraded. So there are existing pipelines, but because of growth, they have to be upsized. But for growth, we probably don't need to touch them. They can stay there. But growth will dictate that we go there and expand that pipeline, increase the size of that pipeline. We also see on this map green lines. They are going into territory that we were not servicing before. So this is a new area, a new pipeline, not upgraded pipeline, not increased. It's a new line, new alignment, new pipe. Any questions on this? Now we're looking at some exciting results.
I do have a question. On the purple line that we have near the Sundance neighborhood, so that's going to be the top right portion of your map. To the best of my knowledge, most of that area for new construction is now built out and homes are finished and in place and homeowners are there. Would that then dictate the need for that area to be upgraded sooner than later? Any ideas on that? Anybody?
Yeah, I think there's an area in the Northeast. We're talking about the Northeast, correct?
Correct.
There's an area in the Northeast that we identified on the land use. That's why to make it defensible, we identified the land uses. That is expected to develop. If it doesn't develop, it doesn't develop. But if it does develop, we're telling you this is what will need to happen.
So Beaumont, so Beaumont city limit, it runs down Highland Springs Avenue. So would we be servicing portions of Banning in the future?
Tony, can you go back to the land use map?
Yes, got it. This is the 2040 general plan land use.
Okay, which is that, okay, so left map, top right-hand corner is that brown area where that new pipe runs out to. That's the new development. And I know that's not there right now.
Right.
So, okay.
Correct. Yes.
So this is showing
So-
the service area. The green line is the service area also, but also this is the area right on top here.
Okay, all right, that makes sense now. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
And then obviously that area then runs down through those same pipes that runs through the southern area of the eastern side, and so forth. So therefore, all that piping in between needs to be upsized at some point.
Right.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Should I continue? Should I redo the presentation from here or should I skip? Okay, we'll skip all the way. So we were here with the good news, but also with what we will need. So this was the question. Any other questions on this exhibit?
Tony, I have a quick question. When we looked at the Mesa lift station that's undersized, now, does that occur because at the time that this was done, way back when, they didn't require hydraulic studies? I'm not.
Yeah,
Well,
Mayor, I don't think so. I think it was always anticipated that we would need the 12 and 16-inch line. That's what the original plans were.
Right.
It's not unusual that you wouldn't build to ultimate capacity on a lift station or put in the entire line. The line is under Highway 60, so that was the good news that we were able to find through Tony's work. And there are just some small connections on both sides from the lift station to the area just on that side of the freeway, and then from the other side of the freeway back to the plant. And so I don't think that's that unusual that you would have constructed an entire pipe. And certainly if you ran into any financial implications at the time, that would be the easiest thing to cut out. And so that's why we're proposing to you to pay for it the way we are. It is an expansion. It is eligible for DIF, but I think it was always contemplated that that would be needed.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah. This was one of the investigative parts that we had to work on and put this puzzle together. There was no report that said why or why not. We found documents that showed the second pipeline. Oh, there's a second pipeline. Got all excited. We thought it was in the ground, but there were pieces of it in the ground, and we were able to find out where the limits are. So the good news is that we don't have to cross the Caltrans right of way. It's been constructed, so we could put the piece of the puzzle, almost predict, what they were doing, Mr. Mayor. At the time, they probably had some constraints, but they were sharp enough at the time to build the parallel and kept it dry, build a parallel that was going to become an issue from a permitting perspective, from a time construction perspective. So they helped us, but they saved some money by not building the second main. There's no question they had constraints. They didn't build the second main. It wasn't needed at the time. They figured, well, we can construct it when the funds become available. And then we put that puzzle together. We were hoping that it was written someplace. Maybe it was, but we got this taken care of. With the great help from your staff, your very smart staff. All right, so back to that.
We paid him a lot of money to tell y'all that over and over again.
I was going to say, thanks for being upfront about it.
Hey, Christine, we knew that.
I figured.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this map? If not, then we'll go. I mean, this is summarizing what's needed. This is it. This is the results. And the rest is going to be, well, how much? How much does it cost for us to build all those pipelines? Well, it's going to be, of course, a lot. That's a lot of pipelines. And we only need them when the growth happens. When the growth happens, it's going to trigger them, and we can use the model to tell us what segments exactly do we need for just this one development. We don't want to build the whole thing. We have one development coming in. What do we need? So the model becomes a live tool that will be used by your staff in the future to be able to address developers' needs when they're ready. So future system evaluations, evaluate, again, when you look at the future system, you look at evaluating for peak dry and peak wet conditions and validating the recommended improvements. The chapter 8 is that's where we get to costs, and I'm not sure we can mention any dollar amount, and someone will say, "Oh, that's not too a big deal." Cost is going to be has to be addressed. Infrastructure is expensive to build; it's expensive to maintain. So the program identified the 10-year CIP. This is a reasonable planning horizon to look forward to and to plan for. Beyond that, we want to know how much, but also, we don't want to worry about this big number. We want to worry about what do we need for the next 10 years. And we probably know our crystal ball can see a little bit within that. It's hazy, but within 10 years, we can see a little bit better. 5 years, we see clearer. Document cost assumptions. Well, how did we develop costs in case someone is asking or challenging where the numbers came from? We made it very transparent. This is our cost assumptions. These are what we used. Further, we have applied some contingency to the cost because things might change. There are things that happen during construction. And again, for those contingency, we use the same contingencies that Eastern Municipal used. And the capital improvement program, you've seen those, but now the difference here, and when you get them, you'll be able to zoom in on a PDF. You will see some numbers. And why did we add all those numbers? Why did we clutter this? Because every number here is referring to a single pipe, and that number goes to a table. And the table has a more detail about how long is that improvement, what size is it, and does it need any special construction? And then what are the costs for that one improvement, one pipeline at a time? And it goes through on and on with a long list, but I think summary-wise, what are we looking for in terms of costs? And this is a summary. If we're looking at the gravity pipeline improvements, about 3.3 millions. Beaumont Mesa lift station improvement, that is going to be costly because there is more involved. There's a longer force main. The lift station carries a lot of flows. All that area west to the west, plus we need to have a wet well increase, and that's short of $10 million for Beaumont Mesa lift station. There are lift station condition assessment improvements. Condition means for the lift station more than capacity. There are other things that we need for whether it's the electrical, whether it's the components, the pumps, the motors, things are falling apart. We need to maintain those. And those are continued. Those are everywhere. So the costs within the next 10 years are estimated at 3.6 million for that. O&M, operation and maintenance improvements, estimated at 5.1 million. And the treatment plant, at the end of the day, we want to make sure where that flow goes, it's taken care of. And that's important, as important. So the total for the next 10 years is approximately $20 million, or 20.6 to be, the approximate number is 20.6. Any questions on this? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to the build out. And again, build out, that's a lot of flows and that's a long time into the future. The numbers are higher, of course, because the infrastructure we're building is much bigger and to handle a lot more people. Pipeline improvements, 32 millions. Force main, 21 millions. Lift station improvements, 34 millions. And the other wastewater system improvements are estimated at 10.7 for a total of about $98 million. And so in summary, we've gone through this. You made it. Congratulations, you made it. But in summary, what did we look at? What was this all about? It was a hard look at the capacity adequacy of the existing system. Where are we? So we were determining that for existing customers, the capacity of existing sewer system is in good condition. Capacity-wise, I shouldn't use the word condition. The capacity is good. Capacity of most existing lift station is not adequate. So not good all around. The lift stations are an important element as well. Extending service to future growth. The future capacity pipeline projects are developer driven. So when they are needed, we'll identify them, identify the costs associated with them, and then there will be a specific plan and trigger for those, for to develop it. And when it happens, we will construct it. When we need it, we'll construct it. So what you'll expect next will be a deliverable. That's a master plan document. It's it's going to be a big PDF that has all of these exhibits that you saw here, all the tables that you saw here, and more, plus, with a lot of text that describes what the process was, the methodology, that describes how the capacities were judged, what we did through the process. There's a lot that we did that I can't talk about in half an hour. It's an hour. I felt like I only talked for 10 minutes. It's been an hour already. So that's the next step. And the deliverable is also the hydraulic model. That was the investment you made that you didn't have before. Now you have it. Next step is a rate study. Are we paying, are our customers paying adequately for the existing system or not? Or are we under collecting, over collecting? That's what it's about. We want to collect the right amount, not over collect, not under collect. But we don't want to be holding the bags at the end of the day. We want to make sure there's a balance. But also pipeline condition assessment. Remember, we talked about capacity, and I'll mention condition a little bit in the next slides. And that's becoming very important in our state because the state is coming up with regulations. They're at the federal level, but at the state level. The state is very serious about this, and it's going to be coming down. So it's a matter of time, but we may as well start preparing for that. Sorry about that. Also, a more extensive condition assessment. So we make sure those conditions, so condition assessment for the pipeline, for the lift stations, and the master plan needs to be updated every 5 years. Talking about conditions real quick, as you know, underground, you see the pipeline and exhibit on the right-hand side. Over time, the pipelines age, they develop cracks. And with those cracks, roots go through those cracks, they find the water, and they make those cracks bigger. And so when there's rainfall, there's more water that goes into the sewer system. And that's not a good thing because more water means that water from the wet weather is taking up that capacity that was reserved for customers. As a consequence, the pipelines become deficient. As a consequence, also, the pipeline starts to fall apart. What does a pipeline that's aged look like? Let's take a look. So that's, and what you wait to look at it, there's something called CCTV. There's like a camera that you push through the pipeline and monitor and look for cracks. And if you see some cracks in the pipeline, as an example, the camera stops and pans to the right or to the left, take a picture of that and marks it up. And that's how we know where the pipeline is falling apart and we need to maintain it. It's underground. No one cares about it until it falls apart or until it fails. And it fails, you hear about those happening. And some major road collapsed because a sewer underneath it, big sewer collapsed. We don't want this to happen. We want to catch it before it collapses because it's a lot more expensive to fix it after it collapses than it is to fix it, catch it before. So the next step we'll have a CCTV program that goes and evaluates where those lines are defective. As an example, the photo on the right-hand side, remember in this case, this is a concrete pipe. Inside the concrete, there's steel that's holding the concrete. But what you see in the right-hand side, the steel bars are visible. That means the concrete has fallen off, and therefore this is losing its structural integrity. This is condition. This pipeline might become a critical pipeline. It might fail. We don't know when. It might fail in 10 years. It might fail next year. So this exercise will look at the entirety of your system and then rank the pipeline from a likelihood failure. Are they likely to fail? What is the consequence of that pipeline failing? If it's a 6 and 8 inch in the cul-de-sac, well, two residences might be inconvenienced. And okay, maybe it's a risk we're willing to take at this time. But we cannot afford happen is a major pipeline where there's a big consequence, where the water, might or if it plugs and the water, do you have an overflow someplace, or it ends up in a river of the United States, and there's an environmental impact, there's a safety issue to the public. So this next exercise evaluates the risk. This is a business. The next step is evaluating the risk of that business failing. That's what condition assessment looks at. And that's the next step. Thank you for your time. Any other questions?
I've got another one, if that's okay. It's in reference to our lift stations, and in particular, you mentioned with the Beaumont Mason one being undersized. Just in general on the design and how they work, is it redundant? Is there a backup, like, pump? What if it goes out because it's being overused? I'm sure there's a contingency plan, but I don't know what that is.
So I can address one part, I think, what I heard, and this is a great question. Is there redundancy? Oh, we made sure there's redundancy. And this is why you're seeing all of the lift stations, almost all the stations, flagging out as deficient. If we take that redundancy. So one of the criteria we used here, one of the judging elements we used here, if one of the lift stations goes out of service, do we have a plan B, which is another pump station ready to go on standby? I'm here, you don't use me, but when the other pump station goes by, I'm going to be stepping in. Do we have that ability? This master plan looked into it. So when you see a deficiency in a pump station, it's because we wanted to make sure we build that redundancy and for an emergency condition, because they do happen.
Councilmember Fenn, so a couple of items that you've seen us bring forward recently are redundancy items, redundancy pumps. We're also working on the PLC project, which will help us cycle pumps in order to, basically use them all. Instead of you use one, it goes out, one doesn't start, maybe it does. So we've got a couple of those things. And then I think the other deficiency component that you're seeing that Tony has mentioned, again, is adding pumps. And we've worked that into your CIP, that if you go back to the CIP, even that you approved in June, we start to add in 400,000 in 2 years per year to start addressing some of the deficiencies at these lift stations for that.
Yes, and on the Beaumont Mesa lift station in particular, we have already started a project. We brought it to council for approval to get a third pump in there for a little added redundancy. We saw some of the early drafts of Tony's work, and it really pointed out how drastically undersized Mesa was in its current condition. So we've taken some immediate steps, some emergency steps to kind of bridge that gap until we go forward.
All right, very good. Appreciate the information. Thank you.
One other thing, if I can just mention to the city council, that Tony didn't go into, direct presentation about, but it will be in the master plan, and it is something that just want to remind you from the CIP that was adopted in June. We talked about, and Tony touched on it a little bit, but the limited wet well capacity at your regional lift station. So Tony, if you go back to the big map with all the lift stations that feed into each other. So the Beaumont Mesa lift station takes in multiple lift station flow. That particular lift station has a wet well capacity of about 19,000, which is very alarming to us because it has minutes for the response time of your staff should the ATS switch not happen. So again, we deal with multiple things in Beaumont. We deal with the PSPSs. We deal with the rolling blackouts. We deal with just typical maintenance. And if the ATS switch doesn't kick the generator on, and that's just real life, that those kind of things happen. Your best well-laid plan, Thaxton and staff could go out on a Thursday, cycle the generator, which they do. They exercise all the generators at each of the lift stations. And come Friday, we have an event and the ATS switch doesn't kick over or the generator doesn't come on. And so one of the projects that we put into the CIP specific to making sure that we didn't have a system failure that resulted in fines, was to upgrade the capacity of that wet well and take it to, I believe, an hour response time. And while that still doesn't seem like a lot, it's at least enough to get the call from SCADA to respond for the on-call person. And we don't have 24-hour staffing at the plant. So the on-call person is getting the phone call, and then they're responding, picking up the truck, potentially picking up the Vector truck and getting out. And so we felt like while it is a very large price tag, it was about $3 million, that it was well worth the ability to eliminate fines. That particular lift station, Tony, I think it's back a little bit. It was the one with all the red arrows.
Oh, way back, the one that has the arrows, it's all the way at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So where Beaumont Mesa, sorry, I'm combining all my words, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 lift stations feeding into it. And so, staff does a lot of negotiating with this particular lift station. Should you have an outage, we can stop flow, we can back up in pipelines, but all of that needs to be done. In addition, we felt like because of the location of this next to a tributary, that the fine significance could be much larger. It could be upwards of $1,000 a gallon if you had repeated overflows. You could do the math on that. You don't have to overflow much before you reach 3 million to get to that. So one of the projects you will begin to see that staff will put forward is looking at any of the lift stations. So we're going to start with Beaumont Mesa, and you approved that. But any of these lift stations that actually have flow through another lift station, I think it's important to begin looking at that same scenario. So Noble Creek flows through Marshall before it comes to the plant. That definitely puts Marshall as a regional lift station that is accepting flow from the huge basin where Solera is, as well as the basin where Three Rings Ranch is. And those are, again, all important components when you start to look at the wet well size. So I just wanted to bring that up because Tony didn't necessarily touch into, there was a lot of discussion from the staff standpoint back to Tony with concern about middle of the night overflows, the PSPSs that we're dealing with, that we're not exempt from, despite the fact that I believe Mayor Laura actually sent the letter last year on behalf of the council, or this year on behalf of the council, expressing to Southern California Edison the importance of these components staying online. In addition to that, Thaxton has applied, and I believe the city manager has conveyed to the council that we are trying to get some of the money that was given out to Tesla for backup battery systems at our lift stations. So we have 3 of those in the pipeline. We have not been awarded any of that. We also have it for the plant. It would just be another way to make sure that we don't go offline. The other concern staff has had is with the PSPS events, if they go off for multiple days, are we able to get the diesel fuel that needs to, it's great that you have a generator, but you still have to fuel it. And if we're looking for fuel, probably everyone else is as well. And so we take all of those components in, but we will continue to bring to the city council anything that we see as risks in your system that we want you to pay attention to. Certainly these are, at the end of the day, all council decisions, but we'll give you the monetary assessment of a fine versus the potential of an improvement. So I just wanted to tell council we've looked at that as well.
So Christine, I have a question on that note. So basically then the pipeline condition assessment and all of those condition assessments are a part of the whole wastewater master plan, correct? It's all one. And
Yes.
what's the timeline on those reports coming out, those assessments?
So those will be done yearly. So the legislation that we understand is coming down the pipeline basically says that we have to hit a certain target of our conditions, so we have to CCTV a certain portion, we have to clean a certain portion, and then we have to repair a certain portion. And so what we put into the CIP are numbers associated with that, and into the CIP as well as into your financial projections. As we have tossed this information over to Jennifer Eustachian and the finance team to make sure that we're accounting for this. So we could go out and hire a contractor, and those are the numbers that Tony initially presented to us. Or we believe we can actually do it cheaper in-house by hiring some staff and having some equipment. So that's the route that we've taken thus far, is to make sure that we've got it in-house and in the financial projection. And then anything that is capital related, not staff related, would go into the CIP.
Okay, and that was my main concern, that it's in the projection, and it seems like, yeah.
It is, yes, sir. We worked really hard on the CIP for the wastewater for the next 10 years to make sure that we were capturing all of the things as you go into your rate study. So it's a good dynamic study and also captures what you need it to capture, and defensible, because that's Tony's favorite word.
And just to kind of piggyback on the caller's comments, so when the communities come in and they're paying for their infrastructure through their Mello-Roos, it's not necessarily covering these force lines and these larger lines and lift stations and all that stuff, correct?
It's typically covering items that are related to their development. So if a big development came in and asking, again, this all comes before council as part of your CFD package and your acquisition agreement and a list of facilities. We do require them to be regional in nature. We're not doing the typical residential line that's connecting the 10 houses down a street. That is on the developer to do.
Right. Okay, and my last question concerns, I noticed on some of the data that we're looking at known developments, but how about the unknown developments? Do we have a way, such as annexation areas that we're looking at that might have possible big projects coming in? Is there a way that we plug in numbers into his model that will give us some projection for capacity and so forth?
Yes, sir. That's the absolute benefit of having this hydraulic model is, and we've done this and talked to Tony on a couple of different developments, particularly the ones in Calamasa, and asked Tony to run those coming into our system. So we're able to take, say, a 250 EDU housing development, plop it down on the tract of land, and Tony can run it and chase that flow all the way back to the plant.
Okay, so we can predict on things such as a Cherry Valley project or something that could be coming in and predict what that could be contributing and what kind of capacity we might need. Correct? Yes,
sir. And just as a reminder, so we're prohibited by law to serve outside of your jurisdiction. So everything would have to come into the city of Beaumont in order for you to be able to serve it.
That's correct.
And I'll just add, sorry, Councilmember Martinez, so we would use land use, but in this instance, there's several entitled projects throughout Belmont. So any of the projects that were entitled, we would utilize the known flows that they're entitled for, right? Several specific plans, we would have the actual number of EDUs. So those are the numbers that were utilized. In areas that are not for a specific plan and it's the potential is there, we would defer back to land use. So we would use a density per acre and provide flow calculations that way.
All right, and what I'm concerned more of is annexation areas where we don't have entitlements and we don't have agreements, but we have to kind of predict what it could cost if those things were to happen, because during those discussions of those things, we would have to know whether we could, be a part of that or not. So I just wanted to make sure it would be possible in a model just to kind of predict for our own benefit, at least for discussion. My last question is on the future commercial projects. So on the data where we have the future growth and the future projections for commercial, how do we distinguish between a commercial project that could be something like a distribution center versus something that might be like a food production? Obviously, there's going to be more wastewater produced on that. So would we just have to, again, ways to calculate that as well?
We do, and we worked real hard with Tony on this as well, because there's significant difference between a logistics center and a food manufacturing, and we've been the recipient of both of those within the wastewater system. So we plan for the highest. If they're fully entitled out to industrial, that includes food manufacturing, then Tony included that flow all the way up to food manufacturing, which would be the highest flow out there as a planning tool.
Right.
If similar to what we have done with Mr. McDonald on a couple of his developments, and we've brought you development agreements back, if they're pretty sure they're not going to, as Crossroads 2 was sure that they weren't going to do food manufacturing, then staff has used a development agreement tool to come back to the council and reduce those flows to a specific amount that then triggers a different set of improvements. We file that on the property, so if that property ever changes, that owner who is purchasing the property knows that they are on the hook for the upgrades of those systems, despite the fact that they are fully entitled to the industrial classification.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I really appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem White, you have your hand raised.
I do. I have a couple questions. So, in sort of in regards to what Mr. Martinez was raising, as well as the caller, the money that is used from the CFD bond funding is to basically create the infrastructure that is needed for that development. But it's not covering the long-term 10, 15, 20-year maintenance of that. Even though the payments are going out 20 to 30 years. So I just want to clarify that what I'm saying is correct. In other words, so even if you're concerned that your development paid for the installation of the infrastructure, there's still an ongoing cost for maintenance of the rest of the downstream infrastructure, correct?
That is correct, and that is wrapped into the overall rate.
Okay. And I know, I assume today we're going to get to some numbers, dollars, and sort of some ideas, as I think the final chapter was supposed to be who's going to pay for it and all of that. And I understand what you said about some industrial uses or some projected uses have more demand on the system versus others. I don't know if it's in this report, but is there some kind of standard sort of chart that shows logistics puts this much demand and food that we're doing, and if not, I think it would be helpful for me anyways to move forward. But those were the only questions I have at this point.
We definitely have that level of detail, Councilmember White, and can certainly get it out to the council, and it will be part of the overall wastewater master plan that you will get a draft copy of prior to it. It should be some great nighttime reading for you, and you'll get a copy of that prior to adoption, weeks in advance of asking you to adopt, because we want you to have plenty of time to go through it. That level of detail is definitely in there. And again, I think, as Tony said, we are using EMWD standard that also relates back to land classification. So if the land has a certain classification through the general plan, then we have carried that forward for planning purposes, both for each one of the land uses, if that makes sense. But we can get you definitely what those demand flows are. I've seen the chart that Tony's put together on that.
And thank you. And just a clarification, the reading that's going to put me to sleep, is it going to be better than the 6.5-hour council meeting we had this last week?
It might not be as good as political signs, but we will try to make it
Okay.
close.
All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, sir. Thanks for bringing up those questions and verifying or clarifying the use of the CFD monies. Councilmember Santos.
Yeah, I got a simple one on the your forecast, Tony, on the 10 years regarding the lift stations. We have presently we have a 10 lift stations out there, right? And then you put it on your forecast on the 10 years. That is it only maintenance or improvements? Does the improvements including the additional lift stations because we're growing, and that's the thing that I like to find out on your forecast on this.
So there were two elements that we looked at here. So we looked at capacity. So all the red numbers you see in the columns, the second to last column, those red numbers means a negative, means a capacity deficiency on the pump station. You see Beaumont Mesa is on top, and it's negative 2,700. That's gallons per minute. This is how we measure flow that goes into a pipeline. The measure flow mostly goes into a pump station. That's a big number, and that's why it is. So this looks at the capacity. What capacity size do we need? How many pumps do we need? And that's where the costs are based on in the master plan from a capacity perspective. Additionally, we had VNA who were part of the team, and they did the valiant effort during the pandemic to monitor flows. But also, as they visited lift stations, they took notes on the condition they observed at those lift stations. So in addition to capacity, they took notes on the condition they saw. Was that comprehensive? I think there's a level of that's probably needed that looks at it from a more comprehensive effort. But they looked at conditions, so some of the condition numbers are included.
And Councilmember Santos, in the 10-year CIP, we anticipated all of these lift stations, and some of the lift stations, like, well, I can't see that one, Tony, but like one lift station right now is the lift station that is at Amazon and Wolverine. That lift station essentially goes away in lieu of another bigger lift station. We've anticipated in the 10-year CIP that while that lift station will be new today, as we get out the 10 years, I included that into the CIP, anticipating that in 10 years it would probably need some condition assessment. So you'll likely see that as a rolling number moving forward if you're on council in 10 years, which we fully expect you to be. that number keeps going, because by the time we get through your lift stations, then it's time to cycle them again.
Tony, can you move another, after this 20 million, 0.6 on your data?
I'm sorry, move to where?
The one now, I'm just seeing, on the 20 million, 20.6 million.
Correct.
The one on the screen. Right after
Yes.
that, I mean, can you show that? There's a
Right
98
after
million
that.
that, you put it on the screen before.
Uh,
The forecast
next
of
slide.
98. Next,
slide. This is the total cost. The 20 million.
yeah, there you go, the 98 million.
Yeah, so
The
Councilmember
98 million.
Santos, the 20 million would be what we anticipate going into the city CIP that existing ratepayers would be responsible for. And then Tony, if you'll flip to the next slide.
Next slide, yeah.
And
There you
this
go.
actually coincides with Councilmember White's question. The 98.9 million is today's cost estimate of if every development came in for build out, what the developers would be putting in addition to your system. So this isn't something that we would anticipate the city being responsible for. This is a development cost of 98.9 million, again, in today's dollars. We know that this number will grow over time because it will it will anticipate the CPI increase and items like that if a development doesn't come in for 10 years.
Very good. Christine, my question is, I'm looking on the lift station improvements on
Yes, sir.
34 million. And, is that only improvements or with additional lift station because of the growth of the city?
I think with the growth of your city, you may see that number go up.
Okay.
We did not artificially raise it. And that goes back to it. Tony, if you can go to the $20 million slide. So once a lift station is built and dedicated to the city, Councilmember Santos, then we would obviously take that in. We would be responsible for managing it. It may be that at the end of 10 years, we have to go to 600,000 because we
Yeah.
can't get to 12 lift stations in 10 years.
That's correct. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions. Also, going back and looking at the chart where we did the wastewater unit factor analysis, what does GPD stand for?
Gallons per day?
Gallons per day. So when we look at, and if I understand what I was looking at correctly, we're taking 1,200 gallons a day for residential use per acre, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So as the state continues to push housing and they continue to push densities and higher densities, excuse me, will we be able to anticipate that affecting that number, or will it have any effect on it at all?
This is one of the reasons why Christine mentioned, typically you review the master plan every 5 years, because a lot of things can change.
Okay.
One of them is, the state imposing densities, and a lot of it is coming down the pipeline now. But a lot of things, land use conditions can change. But in this case, let's talk about the densities that the state is talking about. These numbers can change. What is involved here? These numbers did not include the response during the pandemic. Guess what happened to the pandemic? People stayed at home.
Right.
And those people that stayed at home more often were flushing more often, were taking more showers, exercising at home, not going to the club, but at home. So more water was being used. About up to 20% more water was being used. If we were to go with the state directions or trends or encouragement, we would have reduced this number. But the pandemic proved that, wait, if a pandemic comes back or persists, this number might go up again. And so we can't tell the system, the pipelines, oh, we wish we'd have done this. So you want to be a little bit conservative and plan for the near-term future, but also consider all those other factors, including the state mandate to conserve water, including the state mandate, though, to add a second unit. So there's a lot of factors. State mandate wants to add second units as well.
Right, right.
In home. So that also increases flows. We used this team. You have a lot of smart people on your team. I can guarantee you that. I worked with a lot, and some of the smart, if not the smartest I've seen. They dove into those numbers. So we considered all those factors, and we have to balance at the end of the day. This is a planning tool. Based on what we know today, we have to make a judgment and be conservative, and yet consider all those factors and plan for the 10-year and plan for the next, how many years we have. So there was a very methodical approach to developing those factors. But also we looked at, Eastern Municipal, what factors we look at with their approach, their methodologies. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure the factors we're using make sense, not conservative. Defensible, to my preferred word, defensible, because those have to balance to a certain number that is defensible. We can't say we want to multiply it by a factor of 2. Our current flows are indicating those factors are like they are shown here. And therefore, we are using the current characteristics of the flows, accounting for vacancies and all of that other stuff.
Okay.
So we adjusted them a little bit, but also they are based in reality.
Okay.
And Mayor, in terms of infill development or anything that would be on a single family residential home, if a truck came in and had 6 homes, or, even they were building something with 20. Jeff's been working very hard to put together some processes with his team, again, to make sure that we take a deposit, that we run this hydraulic model, and that we don't end up with a scenario where we have a pipe overflow.
Okay, perfect. And I think that goes back to the public comment we had earlier regarding accountability. I mean, we're on this and we're looking into the future. Okay.
And another clarification I'd like to add, if you see the numbers in blue on this table, 3.6 in the column that says 3,662,000 gallons per day.
Right.
This is the actual flow that was measured. But we also accounted for a vacancy rate. So the next column, we say single-family residential, we look at the statistics. There's a 10% vacancy in residential homes. We can't ignore them. We said, okay, it's not seen at the plant. We are going to reserve that capacity.
Okay.
When those homes are occupied, that flow is going to come in. We can't be surprised by that flow. We're going to reserve that flow and say, that's yours. We're going to keep it whole for you, and then we're going to move on and project and see what the needs are for future developers. So this team looked at a lot of perspectives, a lot of variables, just to make sure we have considered them and we can address them if they do come up.
Thank you for explaining that. You explained the high month in November, but you really didn't explain how we got a high month in August, basically what's in the middle of summer. But
Typical, if we don't look at wet weather flows, the highest flows that we expect are during the summertime. And people may be more active, so they use more water indoors. But we do see that the typical dry weather flows, and so this is dry. There are no rain. If you look on top, there's no rainfall, and so the dry weather flows are typically the peak dry weather flows are in July or August. And in this case, I'm not sure why July is low, but August seems to be the higher dry weather flows.
Okay.
And then the rest, I mean, November and December, you can tell these are based on, they're based on wet weather flows, response to wet weather. But summertime, maybe you have a visiting population as well.
Okay.
There's more dry weather flows that makes it to the plant.
And I'll point out, if you look at January, Mayor, you'll see significant rainfall, but you don't see the corresponding inflow and infiltration.
Right.
So some of the inflow and infiltration that we found is due to construction, and that's not unusual. That the developer will come in and put all the pipes, and the clean outs will get cracked, or a manhole cover will shift. And so we were actually able to take this data, which was super neat, based on the basins, and that's what we chase back. And Thaxton and his crew work on that all the time. And then we've also incorporated the building inspectors into this process to make sure that we don't have that construction inflow that's coming in. And so, 1 month you may actually see a significant rainfall, but you may not see it at the plant. There are lots of variables that can happen within the system based on that.
Thank you for that clarification. I really appreciate that. Christine, I'd also like to thank you and your staff. I've seen these items coming forward on the agenda, and I know that in regards to repairs and replacements, and those are because we're looking and inspecting the lines, which hasn't been done in the past. And so I'm very grateful for that. And Thaxton, thank you for all your hard work as well in keeping up with the plant and the capacities and the flows. And I really appreciate this information. It's extremely helpful for us. Who knew wastewater would be so exciting, correct?
Thank you, Mayor.
It's so exciting.
Would you like to hear the presentation again?
Oh, would you look at the time? I'm sorry, I'd love to, but we're short on time. So unless council has any questions or staff has anything they'd else like to share?
I would like to thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing us to do this information. This study was so critical for the wastewater system and moving forward with good planning and good operations, and really is a tribute to council protecting their asset. And so thank you guys for allowing us to do this work.
It does provide a level of comfort for me as a council member as well, so I appreciate that very much. So with that, I will go ahead and adjourn this workshop at 5:41. Tony, thank you very much for your presentation and your hard
It was my
work.
pleasure. Thank you. Always a pleasure working with your staff. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.